Hello, my name's Scott Monroe and welcome to my chapter presentation. My group and I chose the book by Jodi Riess, 120 Content Strategies for the English Language Learner. I in particular chose chapter 9 of this book, which focuses on textbook reading strategies. For me and my classes, I use textbook often. I use them for do now activities, to analyze a graph, map, chart, or let's say a political cartoon, and I also assign homework, which uses the textbook. Now, the purpose of this chapter that we're looking at today is to help give middle and secondary school teachers some strategies that can help ELLs learn from their textbooks in a more efficient manner. While textbooks have succeeded in recent years to become more user-friendly and engaging, they still pose huge challenges for English language learners. This is especially true for textbooks that I use in my classes. Now, I have a few students who have been learning English only for a few years, so I can only imagine how hard it is for these students to use these textbooks. For instance, my AP Psychology textbook or my Anthropology textbook. These are meant for freshmen in college, but yet I have juniors in high school using them, so very, very challenging. So this chapter focuses on ways in which we can help ELLs learn from these books better. While this chapter is packed with 10 learning strategies, I will only grace my audience with 3 of these, which are those I find to be the most important according to the classes that I teach. The first strategy we'll be discussing is called teaching reading in reverse, which is really just another way of scaffolding. The goal here is to help students visualize the concepts that they will be reading about in their textbooks before actually reading about those concepts. So to be a little more specific, using textbooks usually involves these steps. First, having students read the text. Second, answer questions according to what you read in the text. And then 3, discussing this information as a class or doing an activity regarding the information you read in the text to help ensure students understand what they read. So now this strategy that we're going to be learning about that deals with this chapter puts all of this into reverse. So now instead of using text the traditional ways, teachers can use text as follows, using these steps. First, teacher takes information from the text and tries to apply its concepts to real life, into a way that students can relate to. This is very important, so now they start off learning about something already having a very strong connection. Second step is to then conduct a class discussion with the students about the topic at hand. Me personally, I do this by using mini lectures, PowerPoint discussions, or if it applies to what you're teaching, you can use a Socratic kind of dialogue with the students. Then the third step is to go over the questions students will be required to answer in the text. The point of doing this is to focus on the main ideas of the chapter/unit. By doing this with the students, you are letting them know explicitly that these are the main ideas and that they have to know the answer to these questions. Finally, we come to the 4th step. Here we basically go right back to the traditional model, and the students should read the text on their own and answer the questions that relate to it. Afterwards, and I kind of do this with my students, is I assign it for homework, and then the next day they come back to class and we can discuss these answers as a class, hopefully with the goal of making sure everybody's on the same page and that the students understand what they read and what they learned. Without actually realizing it, I've been using this strategy for a while now in my classes, especially in my AP Psychology class. What moved me to do this? Well, not the reasons that I'm kind of stating here in this chapter presentation. I started doing it because whenever students would turn homework in based on their text, a lot of them would have wrong answers, and they would maybe copy answers word for word from the book. Now, the answers were correct, but they were copied. They weren't put into their own words, and I had this feeling that they weren't actually learning the material. That's usually a sign students aren't learning if they're just copying from a written text. Anyway, an example of how I've used this when I teach is the unit on motivation in my AP Psychology class. I first engaged the student with a clip from the movie 127 Hours, in which the main character, Aaron Ralston, is a hiker who gets his arm caught in between a rock and a ledge while out hiking by himself one day. After 127 hours, his drive for thirst, hunger, and survival motivates him to actually cut off his own arm in order to escape. Now, maybe you know the scene. If not, take a look. This scene certainly engages students. Now, While my students can't really relate to cutting off their own arm, the scene allows me to move into discussing what it's like to be either very hungry or thirsty, which the students most definitely can relate to. We've all had hunger pangs at some point or another. We've all had that dry mouth where we're just dying for water, something to drink. Now, this is great because in this first step, I've attempted to engage students in a way that shows them the importance of thirst and hunger in their roles in being primary motivators for human beings. In the second step, we begin to discuss the unit using a PowerPoint presentation that I've created that goes through all of the psychologists and all the concepts related to motivation and everything that is important to the unit. Now finally, my last step is to assign textbook reading to students for homework with questions taken from the main subheadings found in the textbook itself. And you might notice that I've skipped a step here. I was supposed to, before assigning the homework and before students went home and read the textbook, they were supposed to, and I was supposed to go over in class the questions they were to be answering to clarify any confusion over how the questions are worded or anything like that. The reason why I skipped this process in my EP class in particular is because of time restraints. The second strategy we're going to talk about today is using oral reading effectively. Now, we've already probably done this in class. You're reading something as a class, could be a newspaper article, something from the textbook, and you pick on students to kind of pick up after another student is finished reading something. Usually I split this into paragraphs. You read first paragraph, you read second, so on and so forth. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad way of doing it, but it comes with its downsides. Sometimes you can stigmatize students and make them feel really nervous, and it really amps up the anxiety that many students get from reading aloud in class. And so if a student, especially an ELL student, does not or is not able to pronunciate correctly or they're not able to read a word, this may embarrass them and it makes them feel bad, and it will kind of dirty their whole school experience, which is not something that we want to do. So the couple techniques that discusses within this strategy help students learn aspects of reading, important aspects of reading, such as pronunciation, pacing, intonation, emotion through reading that's formed through punctuation. The first technique described in this strategy is to have the teacher read out loud. This modeling technique is particularly relevant in an international school where most students may not speak English as a first language. The second strategy is termed hot potato. You go around the room handing off a baton, something that you can pass from student to student. When you do so, they must pick up reading at the time you pass it off to them. To reduce anxiety, students can pass this back to after reading only one word if they want. The main goal here is twofold: to make sure students are paying attention and following along with where you're reading, and to allow healthy participation of students without putting too much pressure on them. The benefits of using these oral reading techniques are well documented. Being able to combine oral and visual aspects of reading helps students understand text better. Think about the confusing example of homophones, such as peace and peace. These are words that are spelled differently, have different meanings, but they're pronounced exactly the same. Think of this for a student learning English for the first time. Or better yet, look at homographs, which are spelled the same way but are pronounced differently. So for example, I can use this in a sentence. The farm was used to produce produce. Produce meaning food that you can grow, and produce is to actually make something. So two different meanings, but spelled the exact same way. Or how about this funny headline? Bakers on strike. They need more dough. You can see there's actually two kind of homographs here. Need, which can also be spelled N-E-E-D, and dough, which is spelled the same but two different meanings. Dough meaning a slang for money, and dough meaning the dough that a baker rolls that makes bread. So reading aloud can help clarify these confusions for students. The third strategy I'm going to talk about from my chapter is to pair ELL beginners with volunteer buddies. Here the strategy is pretty simple and straightforward. You take an ELL student and pair them up with a student who is a fluent speaker of English and who tends to like helping others. During their pairing, the fluent speaker can help the ELL by speaking slowly, explaining how to pronounce words, defining words, and even explaining idioms and other certain kind of slang terms that are very confusing for ELLs. So in these ways, an ELL can be supported by not only just a native speaker, but also by a peer, which sometimes is more helpful. Furthermore, bicultural exchanges like this go a long way in improving classroom and even school-wide chemistry and cohesion. So that wraps up the three strategies from my chapter on how to use textbooks more efficiently or effectively with ELL students. I hope you learned something useful, and I look forward to your responses. Bye-bye.